and welcome to Sustain, the podcast where we talk about sustaining open source for the long haul. Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? Should we have more doctorates in math on this podcast? Interesting questions today. Very excited to get into them. First, I want to make sure you know who we are, the voices behind the podcast, and then we'll introduce our amazing guest. I'm Richard Littauer, your host. Hello, everyone. We also have Justin Dorfman on the call. JD, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Ben Nichols, how are you doing?
I'm good. Don't shirk the question. How are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. Was I shouting the question?
No, don't shirk.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, cool. Shirk. Eric Berry, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, and word on the street is that you're doing pretty good too there, Richard.
I'm doing okay. Too much coffee, but that is all right. We have an excellent guest on today to talk about some really cool stuff. Rodrigo Mendoza is joining us. Rodrigo Mendoza is the founder and CEO of Quine, which is a data-driven professional network for software creators, and also of GitNFT, an NFT minting platform for GitHub commits. Rodrigo earned his PhD in mathematics from the University of Oxford in 2017. Yes, that means he is very smart. Soon after, he joined Oxford's engineering department to pursue postdoctoral research in neural network verification and program induction. I honestly don't know what program induction means. In the past 10 years, Rodrigo has held data science positions at startups, at government labs, and investment funds. His interests now lie at the intersection of OSS, Web3, and the future of work, which makes sense and is probably why he is here on this podcast. Rodrigo, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, Richard. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for coming on the show. Okay, so you have done a lot of stuff. I want to know, first off, what Quine is.
Sure. There are really two ways to understand Quine. One is from the technical problem we're solving. The other one is from our mission as a company. I guess our mission as a company is we want to maximize the GDP of software creators. This is borrowing from Stripe's language. We think that coding is a superpower. If you can code, then you should be able to monetize your skill in a way that is very easy and very fluid. So the overarching mission of the company and the technical problem we're solving essentially is that of experience quantification of developers. Software developers or software creators, as we like to call them, are a very unique type of professional. When they work, they naturally produce data as a byproduct of their work, right? Like this data is like code, Git metadata, social interactions. Most of the time, this data ends up living in public or private repositories in the cloud. And we think that quantifying this data is very important for several things. One of them is unlocking systematized talent allocation. But also we have some very ambitious ideas here on how we can use this to serve open source as a community. We think the problem of experience quantification has very strong implications in the maintainer problem in open source and also in helping open source transition into a fully fledged creator economy. So yeah, I don't know whether that makes sense, but happy to answer any question.
It does make sense. And I really like that. I think it's cool that you're trying to help coders be able to work better. My immediate question is more of an economics one, I suppose. I could look at, say, someone who works on a farm and they may go around and they may feed the chickens and they may feed the cows and they may shovel manure. This is all important. And if they wrote down, I do these things, that's also data. And so they also generate data. Why shouldn't they also be able to monetize their things? In another way, we also think of students. Students take tests and we use the test to sort of judge their qualities. Why shouldn't that also be monetized? Why are you focusing on open source and software developers in particular?
It is definitely the case that all professions should be able to synthesize that experience data in a quantitative way. Right now, we find that software developers are maybe like the profession in which it is both easier to kind of do this, and also the profession of software developer in the current economy is one of the most high value type of profession. Essentially, we think that by focusing on software developers, we're in a way focusing on everyone at the same time because the barriers of entry into software development are so low right now. You can definitely learn the skills online. You can essentially train yourself to be a developer in any different way. But we think that software development is the job of the future. It's going to be the one of the most valuable jobs around in the next few decades. So it just makes sense to first focus on software developers. I mean, the problem is already pretty ambitious. So trying to do it for every profession, it is just something that I guess is outside of the scope of our capability, right? So we're developers, we love code, so we want to focus on software development.
Outside the scope sounds right to me. That's a really good answer. More annoying question than that one. How are you not just a subset of LinkedIn? What's different about your platform?
First of all, we think that current professional profiles essentially don't really make justice to software creators, right? Like LinkedIn, essentially how we right now, LinkedIn is a bragging game. People like to brag about the status they have by, I don't know, like a big employee in a particular company. It also focuses on, I would say, like high level labels. So in a way, what role you have at a company might mean a completely different thing from company to company. And in the case of software developers, we think that is especially unfair. Like software developers are a multidimensional type of professional. The current market tends to reduce developers to like a small set of labels like front end, Python, Django, whatever. But really, like there is so much texture and so much experience that it's just not possible to sort of have a professional profile like LinkedIn that is able to capture this texture and this granularity of skill. So we think in particular that for software creators, it is essentially their work that should be able to speak for themselves. It's not necessarily like what status you have at a company or what position. It is what have you created, what have you worked on, what do you know? A lot of this information can be inferred directly from data that at the moment lives in open source. You mentioned before, like why open source? So we think of open source like the professional network of the future. Open source is really special in that if we think about how education has changed, maybe in the past 4 decades, to be able to program a computer back in the 1980s, 1990s, you probably need a degree from like Stanford or something, right? Like you really need to be like super specialized, super technical. Potentially in the 2000s, you could get some of the skills through a type of bootcamp. Last decade, maybe like micro certificates were quite big. How we see this trending is we think open source contributions are essentially going to be micro certificates of skill. Contributing to open source is the best possible way to stand out from your peers. Like definitely it's not much easier to jump into a software career just by learning things online, but it's at the same time much more difficult to stand out. And we think here that open source is the best tool that the community will have to stand out and to create something that is meaningful. Also, this really deep economic problem in education in which there is so much work that just gets lost in the training of an individual. If you think about it, like someone that goes to standard education, they go through a high school, I don't know, like a college, maybe even like graduate school, and they're all like working very, very hard to acquire that skill. What we think open source offers is a way to learn, but at the same time, transform that work you're investing in learning to also give something to the community. So why we think open source is a really special place in this sense. We think it can indeed convert into special type of learn platform if equipped with the right technologies. And in a way, like one way to think about it is open source contributions are really proof of work, of skills. And what we're doing at Quine is we're building a machine learning powered validator. We're essentially like that type of entity that takes the contribution and transforms it into a quantitative, visual, granular certificate of skill.
So I couldn't agree more with what you've just described there. I think open source in general has arguably lifted an entire generation in terms of upward social mobility. And I think my major kind of concern is that is kind of often based on privilege, but that it's also inclusive of a kind of singular set of skills. And I'm just wondering, what are you doing, or are you thinking about how to kind of broaden that and involve kind of more types of contribution that aren't necessarily just code, or what pathways you could create to kind of bring more people into open source to kind of distribute that opportunity to more people?
I think it's a very important problem. In the past few years, it has been normalized that code contributions are not the only ones that people should be working on, right? Like there are many other contributions like documentation type of contributions, like maybe like design type of contributions, I don't know, like graphics, etc. So I think the solution to this problem will come naturally with respect of like more companies, more organizations, and more communities leveraging on open source to work in a distributed and collaborative way. I like to think that open source is still in its early stages. It has, of course, been around for a number of decades, but it's only in the last decade that GitHub really unlocked a community around it, kind of like social type of capital in respect to contributions to create repositories. So it is definitely the case that we can find more and more repositories that are, I would say, first of all, like non-code specific, for example. But it's also the case that maybe with the advent of like crypto and DAOs, more and more companies decide to build in the open. And repositories become not only a repository of code, but a repository of other things where other people can chip in with stuff. That be data, it can be design, it can be like documentation, etc. So we think this is something that will come naturally in the system. And what we're doing here is the whole point of us wanting to quantify the experience is we think open source, in order for it to succeed, it has to be treated as a creator economy. And really, open source has the same problems it has in terms of like it has problems around attention, it has problems around monetization, it has problems around content creation, content consumption, etc. So one of the ways we think we can, I would say, remove frictions in content creation and content consumption is by quantifying experience and kind of increasing the relevance. For example, when a person receives as a recommendation in open source. So if you go to the product right now, the product right now is a recommendation system for open source projects. It's a recommendation system that automatically learns from your GitHub activity and kind of like highlights those projects that we feel might be the most interesting for you. One of the things we're working towards is on kind of, I want to say, making those recommendations more biased toward the repositories that need the most help. So sort of like the repositories that maybe are the most open to new contributors so that people can kind of like more easily become open source contributors or like just start their journey in open source.
I really like those answers. I'm really excited for how Quine works. It sounds really cool. I like the idea of your optimism in ML being able to solve market issues. That is great. I feel like there's not enough optimism in the world. And so seeing more of it is lovely. You are not only working on Quine, you're also a postdoc. You also are a grand chess master. Well, you like playing chess anyway. So, but another thing you work on is GitNFT. I want to know more about what GitNFT is. NFTs are really controversial and they're really weird. And for listeners who want to check out, you are free to do so, but I encourage you to hang on because you have an opportunity here to learn why NFTs might help the problem as opposed to not solving it. So first, what is GitNFT and how does it work?
GitNFT really is part of Quine. So we like to market it as a different product because of how different it is, but in reality, it's one other product of the company. We kind of started working on GitNFT, or at least starting thinking about it early this year. The crypto world was essentially like picking up a lot of momentum, and there was a lot of conversation around NFTs. At the beginning, I guess it was not evident what NFTs could do or what NFTs were, but under the context of open source as a creator economy, then evident type of thing that we think should exist for the benefit of maintainers and open source. So GitNFT is a platform. It's a minting tool in which software creators can mint NFTs of their open source GitHub commits and automatically sell them in the OpenSea marketplace as art. So that sounds a little bit high level, but what GitNFT lets developers do is precisely like at no cost at all. And this is something that we're very proud of. Like we design GitNFT in a way in which the developer doesn't have to pay for any minting fees or any extra like crypto type of fees for minting a commit. Developers can just immortalize their work in open source. We were very pleased when we were about to release that we heard Tim Berners-Lee was NFTing the code of the World Wide Web and selling it as Sotheby's. So we definitely took that as an indication that we were working in the right direction and that it made sense to democratize this type of tool. With respect to like why GitNFT or like why do we care? There are a number of reasons. First of all is the monetization reason. So we think NFTs can be a very interesting vehicle for people to give back to the contributors that have created the open source over which I would say like the economy stands. The minimum value in GitNFT here is it's often the case that when people donate to open source and like maybe they will get like a avatar in their Patreon account. First of all, it's much more cooler if where you donate to open source, you can get back this NFT certificate of your donation. We think this can essentially the donator like highlight, I guess, his or her taste in open source projects, in code, etc. Secondly, we think we're already at a stage at which some open source contributions can be considered having historical significance or historical value. There's some open source that maybe has been written like a number of years ago. It's already part of our digital infrastructure, and kind of like World Wide Web, it can be argued that it can become a collector item. So with respect to sort of, I would say, thinking about code as art, we think that an NFT based on a commit can have value based on historical significance or even based on the aesthetics or coolness of the code. So yeah, we released GitNFTs back in August. We're still bootstrapping the community. We're still incubating the project. And we're really thinking about the next iteration of GitNFT. We think that in the next iteration, a central part of it will be to not only reward the authors of the commits, but also rewarding the maintainers of the repositories where that commit lives. So kind of like making it like big more fair value redistribution model. And yeah, we will have a number of other things that we're thinking about, and we'll be sharing next year when we release a V2.
Cool. You bring up community, and why do you think some people in our industry or our community are so hostile towards NFTs and Web3 as a whole? What gets them so riled up?
With respect to NFTs, I would say that, I think this is true for NFTs and crypto in general, is that, of course, like the open source community and developers are a very critical community. They really reason things out a lot. They definitely always, I would say, question like ulterior motives. And I think the problem here is that NFTs are sometimes a scam, or people regard them as a scam. And it's not only NFTs, it's also like cryptocurrencies, like you get cryptocurrency with a very nice, cute dog on it. And then all of a sudden it just jumps up, and then people dump it. And then someone, we don't know who, but someone made millions out of that pump and dump, right? So I think very reasonably, and many people are upset about potentially like how many non-technical people have lost money or have been scammed by this type of projects. That's completely understandable. And I think that's not a reason to neglect what's happening in the markets. It is the market that's going to decide whether NFTs are a thing or not. Even if we don't like it, it's kind of like consumers and users and NFT projects that at the moment are like challenging the economy and challenging users and trying to, I would say, to stay here for the long term. One of the main things we're hearing from people in the community is we get a lot of rage because people think that we are minting NFTs of other people's commits. I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of GitNFT and of the platform itself. What we're doing here is just allowing developers and allowing open source creators to mint NFTs of their own commits on GitHub and to keep the NFT for themselves. So once people mint an NFT from GitNFT, they keep it. I mean, it's their own. They're free to sell it. They're free to give it away. They're free to like do nothing with it. So GitNFT here is just like that, essentially like between a developer that wants to, I would say, immortalize her work. And yeah, like the blockchains that will end up holding those particular assets. We've also got some comments about, and this is in particular from members of the crypto community, in which they say that they don't believe in NFTs, or they just don't want to know anything about NFTs because they think they are creating new ways of consumerism. I think that's also true in some way. Like the utility of some NFTs is ill defined, to say the least, right? It's definitely like there are a number of NFT projects in which I would never put a penny on them. We think GitNFT is different. First of all, there is no one at the back that is kind of absorbing all the profits from GitNFTs. Secondly, what we're doing here is we're just unlocking a new monetization mechanism for open source, right? Like the money you put in NFT goes directly to the author of the commit that underlies that GitNFT. So part of our long-term vision here is to kind of like also start thinking about, we want to flip the script in the way open source monetizes. It's really sad that we're talking about donations for open source. Donations is like, this is not
it's pocket change. I know very popular maintainers that do work on top projects that make very little money, like poverty.
This is sad. Open source is not a charity. It shouldn't be a charity.
Right.
What we want to do here is flip the script and be like, donating on open source can even become an investment opportunity. There is upside for the person that donates, and there's also upside for the creator. One of the cool things in our contract is that the creator gets a percentage every time that NFT gets flipped. If someone ends up creating like a very cool commit or whatever, then every time that NFT changes hands, the creator will get a percentage of that transaction, which we think is fair. And we think also incentivizes, I think also open source creators to think about contributing to open source in a different way. We don't know how open source contributions will look like if all of a sudden we start attributing monetary value to, I don't know, like the coolness of the commit message, like the efficiency of the code, the beauty of the code, around the discussion in the pull request. There is so much things right now that have value. It's just that value is not captured anywhere.
I have to push back, and I have to push back because I'm really interested in how you're thinking and how you justify it. So I am not filled with rage, but I am definitely someone who doesn't like NFTs. And that's just how it is for me. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just going to say I personally don't like it very much. And one of the reasons why is I'm really curious how you deal with the internal, what I see as conflict between you're putting all of the ethics on the market. You're saying the market's going to decide. The market's going to decide whether it's worth it. But you're also saying the market is broken. And it's really funny that you're saying two things at the same time. One of them is that, well, we're just trying to make another way for people to make money, but also, well, the way that it currently works doesn't work, which is why we're making new things. And I see that as being two stories that like don't make sense together. Because if you're justifying the market, then people lose out on open source. They shouldn't contribute. That more fool them.
It's probably the reason why we're both discussing NFTs and GitNFTs. I think my opinion changes slightly from one to the other, and I have an opinion on both. But the way we have to think about them is different. With respect to NFTs, of course, there's like very low ethics in allowing scams going on online, and that shouldn't happen. The market is still early, so of course, some projects can still get away with it. For the case of GitNFT, we just don't think there is an ethics problem there, because it's really like the content that is being minted belongs to the person that is minting it. And we can just think about it as a donation. It's just a donation that gives you back an NFT for you to show it around, put it in your profile, to show people that you're donating to OpenSSL or whatever, like Coral, etc. So we think for the case of GitNFTs, all we're doing right now is rephrasing open source donations in the language of NFTs. Where we would like to see it in the future is seeing these GitNFTs capturing value that wasn't captured before. And this value at the end of the day is going to go back to the creators. It's going to go back to the contributors. We think that as long as that value is channeled back to the creator, and as long as, we Quine as an entity don't take data that doesn't belong to us, then it's only upside for everyone, right? It's just essentially a new way to make money.
So I don't want to follow up and just have everybody state their position on NFTs as a panelist, but I just kind of wanted to say that for me, I haven't decided, but I always find it very difficult to see anything in the NFT marketplace as different from the art marketplace. There are a lot of people who are ripping people off. There are some people who spend a lot of money who don't really necessarily benefit or gain anything from that particular transaction. Like people who spend a lot of money on artworks that are then on long-term loan in museums and so on. And it seems, I think in this particular instance, there is a significant opportunity for open source contributors to effectively sell a byproduct of their contribution. And if you look at it just from the perspective of trying to support those creators and offer them a new way of being able to support their work, I'm here for it. A lot of the issues that we see in marketplaces like this is around trust, and it's effectively like trust with the auction house themselves, right? So GitNFT is effectively in this position, the auction house, and that's where a lot of the trust resides. So I wonder whether you could talk a little bit about like some of the issues that you've had with GitNFT and how that conversation has gone, because I think that might be something that's worth just addressing and talking about your experiences with.
So first of all, to clarify, Quine is not an auction house. It's just the minting house. Like we are leaving auctioning to the creator, right? The GitNFT automatically goes to OpenSea. And then the person there has complete control and complete, like I would say, power to do with it whatever they want. Like they can sell it for a price tag or they can start an auction on it. So yeah, like we really don't feel in a position in which we're entitled to like take control of the market either. We, of course, want to help creators sell their GitNFTs, but we don't want to control the supply or anything like this, right? So trust essentially is a social and a community problem. So I think we'll only acquire that trust in terms of with respect to like members of the community trusting Quine as essentially the organization or the community or the network that is able to sort of like do that minting process and channel it to an auction house in a language. So yeah, since we launched, we have been talking to a number of developers. And I mean, like the collection now includes commits from quite a few projects, but we have GitNFTs from Bitcoin Core. We have some from MetaMask. We also had Max Howell, the creator of Homebrew, minting the first commit of Homebrew. So there is definitely some market appetite, at least on the supply side, to sort of give this thing a try and try to monetize creations and open source contributions. And what we're still, of course, like working on is on incubating the network and building the trust to a degree in which the supply side is fluid enough to start catalyzing demand side by itself. So at the moment, we're actually very interested to talk with open source maintainers or people that kind of like are struggling to monetize from their open source repositories. I think it's this opportunity to just talk to the maintainers listening to this, but we're in the process of planning a version 2 of GitNFT and a version that is focused on maintainer monetization apart from a contributor monetization. So we're definitely interested to like be talking to the maintainers and work out what is the best way for GitNFT to serve the communities. GitNFT is helpful, not in terms of will be successful, not in terms of how many GitNFTs are minted, but in terms of like how many communities get economic support through GitNFT. So at the moment, we see ourselves as essentially learning from the developer, learning from the communities in the process of incubating this project even further. We're not in a rush to be in a position like CryptoPunks or something in which we just fill in the project with, I would say, like crypto scavengers in a way. We want the project to become real utility. We want people buying GitNFTs to buy them because they really understand where that money is going rather than just like people wanting to flip NFTs here and there to make a profit, right? So in that sense, we've been taking our time a little bit with the incubation of the project, but we think that is a good thing. I think that next year, a bunch of these scammy and NFT projects will just go down. People will find out that some NFTs are indeed a scam. A lot of money is going to leave the space, just as it happened in 2017. The projects with real utility would remain. We'll be able to learn from this iteration and we'll be able to like go up or down, right? And what we're doing now is we're optimizing for utility rather than optimizing for having a number of sales or a number of buyers, etc. So we're still in the process of defining the utility and defining like how GitNFTs can make a community better. So that's essentially our main goal with GitNFTs.
I think you make a great point. Some compare the current state of NFTs to like the tulip mania of 1637. And my answer to them is, yeah, once the bubble pops, people still bought tulips, so just not at 10x the price. So I do think that there is life after this mania because it's not going to be like this forever. It's just not. It's been proven over and over. So
I have the opposite feeling, but that's okay.
That's what we're here for.
We are here for discussion. I don't want to go into mine in too much detail because I am running up on time. Eric, you haven't said much this podcast and you have a question. Is it short? Because we do need to wrap up.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. I came into this show today with a lot of thoughts about how I feel about the GitNFT and NFTs overall. And I don't want to get into that too much, but I do want to just say some of the things that I really love about this project. I had a hard time understanding the creation of monetary value over these, but the one thing that I do really like is that you've created a way for people to memorialize something that was important in their life, a commit that was important to them. I remember the first time when one of my posts was on the front page of Hacker News, and I took a screenshot of that, and it means a lot to me. And I imagine that people who are contributors, maybe they're the first commit to Rails or Python or some amazing project, and they're really proud of that. And what you've created is a way for developers to go in and essentially make that something that's permanent that they own for free. I commend you for that. I think that is really the true story of what NFT does. And I think that the monetization is, I mean, even though we'd all love to see that being the case, I think that the real unspoken value here is that you can create a full history of your own commits that meant something to you. And I think that's really important, that should be stated in this show. That's all I got.
Thank you very much, Eric. Indeed, in the case of GitNFTs, they are valuable in terms of like how much they are valuable for the creator. One of the cool things the platform has is when the NFT gets minted, we give the creator 250 characters to write something about that commit. Some people write some jokes. Some people write like why that commit had an impression on them or what it meant for their professional career. I don't want to like say too much about the next version, but one of the tweaks we might be giving GitNFT is starting to treat it as well as a micro certificates of skill. We talked about this at the beginning of the call. The future of professional identity, if Web3 is right, is a decentralized future. So it just doesn't make any sense for a Web2 company to like hold all that experience information inside the private servers by in contributions as a micro certificate that, essentially we're also like, I would say, helping developers decentralize their professional identity and kind of making it interoperable. We might see in the next few years in the metaverse. So that's essentially one of the directions we're thinking about for GitNFT. The market MVP of GitNFTs is art, but there's like really a number of applications that people are already starting to talk about for the near future. And for our case, one of the things we think GitNFT will be exceptional for is really for providing skill certificates, proof that you something and something you can use to validate skills, get better jobs, get better opportunities, monetize at your market rate, keep coding essentially.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Eric, for wrapping it up so nicely. Thank you, Rodrigo, for sharing with us about this new way to get maintainers money, which we're all here for. So that's the best. Where can people follow up with you? Where can they learn more about Quine? Where can they follow you on Twitter?
My Twitter handle is R0DMS. They can also follow Quine's Twitter handle, which is Quine_SH. And we also have a Twitter handle for GitNFT, which is just GitNFT. We were early enough to snap that Twitter handle. So yeah, we will be posting updates. I mean, by the way, Quine is still a little bit flying under the radar. We haven't really yet announced the platform and stuff, but like very soon we will be making some big announcements and pushing like much more updates than we have. Like we were working a little bit on stealth mode this last year, but now we kind of want to start working a bit more in the open.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Now is the time of the show for Spotlight. Spotlight is where we point out people, things, NFTs, what have you, that have helped us, improved our lives, or we just think needs a little bit of love. Ben Nichols, you look the most contemplative. What is your Spotlight today?
Just because we've spoken a little bit about introducing and kind of bringing people into open source, I wanted to give Exorcism a shout out, exorcism.org. It is a platform for people to mentor new programmers and for people to kind of get into software programming. I think there's about 55 different programming languages covered. So yeah, I just wanted to cover that because I think they've released a recent update in the last 3 months or so, and they've got a lot of good traction. They're doing some good work.
Awesome. Thank you. Eric Berry, what is yours?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say the Firefox Developer Edition for their CSS, Flexbox, and Grid tooling. If you do front-end work, those tools are incredible, and you can't get them in the Chrome-based browsers. So Firefox Dev Edition.
Thank you so much. Justin Dorfman.
There's a Git NFT discussion on our discourse. This is how this all started. And you can join the conversation at j.mp/sustain-git-nft. And yeah, see you there.
Love it. My shout out goes to Concerta. Concerta is a long release Ritalin-like product that helps people with ADHD focus. I don't know if I have ADHD, but I'm actively working with a psychiatric nurse practitioner to figure out what drugs may work for me. And I want to normalize people working on their biochemistry to figure out how they can focus more and be better people. And so I figured I would just give a shout out to that. Been trying for the last week, and I really can't say anything because of confirmation bias and new processes. It always makes me feel good and focus better, but it does seem to help. So Concerta, Rodrigo, what is yours?
So mine is a project called Bioconductor, which was the first open source project I use in the professional setting. It's like an R community for like bioinformatics. And yeah, like in my first job, it just saved me so many times. So I want to send them kudos. I used it back in 2009, 2010. So I don't know whether they're still as active as before, but yeah, thanks for that.
Awesome. Rodrigo, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much. Let us know how it's going. People who are listening, thank you so much for listening. If you want to talk about GitNFT, if you want to talk about NFTs, if you want to talk about helping maintainers out and building better resources for the market of open source, discourse.sustainoss.org is probably the best place to talk to other people in the Sustain community. We also have a Twitter. We also have this podcast. If you want to come on and offer retorts or follow-ups or your own awesome thing, please reach out. Again, Rodrigo, thank you so much. Best of luck and take care.
Thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed the conversation.